They said her birth was a miracle. But when you look closer, you realize it wasn't a miracle at all. It was a curse. In a forgotten town hidden deep within the Appalachian hills, a child was born with eyes too far apart, a jaw that never quite fit, and a silence that hung over her like fog. Her name was Mary Lou, and the people who whispered about her said she was proof that some families were never meant to continue. She didn't know why the neighbors stared. She didn't understand why children hid behind their mothers when she walked by. But everyone else did, because Mary Lou's parents weren't just husband and wife. They were brother and sister. And their parents before them, well, they were family too. The story of Mary Lou isn't just about one woman. It's about generations of isolation, pride, and denial. Families so far removed from the world that the laws of blood and nature simply didn't apply anymore. What began as a family protecting its own name slowly twisted into something grotesque, something unrecognizable. Old letters, faded and water-damaged, still whisper her history. A preacher once wrote, "There's something wrong up in them hills. I've buried 4 children with the same face and no father to name." But no one listened. The family's land stretched across miles of forest, their homestead shielded by poverty and fear. Outsiders rarely came in, and those who did didn't always come back. When government surveyors arrived in the 1940s to map the region, they stumbled onto a small settlement that time forgot, sagging cabins, barefoot children, and an eerie sameness to every face. Among them was a young girl with a crooked smile and eyes that seemed both empty and knowing. That girl was Mary Lou. She became the symbol of what the locals would later call the tainted bloodline. But the truth is far darker than any rumor. And to understand what she became, you have to go back to where it all began. Because no one is born cursed. They're made that way, by generations of choices that should never have been made. Before Mary Lou ever drew her first breath, the family's tragedy had already taken root. It began with a man named Elias Whitmore, born in the late 1800s. A proud, defiant patriarch who didn't believe in the outside world. He built his cabin high above the valley, surrounded by dense pines and narrow trails only he could navigate. People said Elias didn't trust outsiders, but the truth ran deeper. He believed his family carried a pure bloodline, untouched by what he called the corruption of strangers. When his eldest daughter turned 14, Elias told her she'd never need to marry outside the family, that they were chosen, marked by God himself to keep their lineage strong. But God had nothing to do with what came next. In time, the Whitmores became ghosts among the living. Their children married cousins, and those cousins bore more children, generation after generation, until the family tree stopped branching altogether. Birth defects crept in like rot beneath old wood, cleft lips, twisted limbs, and minds trapped in eternal childhood. Yet the family refused to see it as decay. They called it God's testing. Neighbors whispered but kept their distance. Some feared them, others pitied them. Once, a traveling doctor tried to visit after hearing strange tales of the mountain kin. But Elias met him at the gate with a shotgun and said, "We don't take kindly to curious men." The doctor never came back. By the time Mary Lou's parents were born, the outside world had forgotten the Whitmores entirely. What remained was a family caught in a loop. Parents who were also siblings, cousins who shared the same grandparents twice over. Their world had no new faces, no new names, only echoes of the same few repeated endlessly. Mary Lou's mother, Clara, was soft, spoken and pale, her mind a fragile mirror that cracked easily under the weight of confusion. Her father, John, barely spoke at all. When Mary Lou was born, the midwife crossed herself 3 times and whispered, "This child won't live long." But Mary Lou did live, and as she grew, she began to ask questions no one dared answer. She wanted to know why the family never left the mountain, why they never visited the town below, why her mother cried at night when she thought no one was listening. Those questions were dangerous, because every truth in that house was buried beneath a century of sin. Mary Lou's childhood was wrapped in silence, the kind of silence that doesn't protect, it smothers. She learned early that asking questions brought punishment, not answers. Her mother would shake, her father's eyes would darken, and the room would fill with a cold, invisible weight. So she stopped asking. She watched instead. She watched the way her family moved, how they avoided mirrors, how they kept the windows boarded, how they buried their dead before sunrise. The Whitmore land was cursed with memory. Every rusted gate, every collapsing barn whispered something unholy. In the evenings, the elders would sit in the dark, rocking in silence, as if listening for voices no one else could hear. Mary Lou would sit at their feet, feeling the strange comfort of their sameness. Everyone with the same wide, set eyes, the same hollow cheeks, the same strange laugh that echoed wrong. But in that sameness, Mary Lou began to feel something different stirring, a sense that she didn't belong. Maybe it was the way her thoughts wandered, or how she dreamed of roads that led away from the mountain. Sometimes, when she stood by the old fence line, she would hear the distant hum of cars from the highway below. That sound, faint, unreachable, was her proof that another world existed. When she was about 12, a state worker came through the area, part of a program meant to assess neglected children in rural Appalachia. She saw Mary Lou playing in the mud, her clothes threadbare, her expression blank but watchful. The woman tried to ask her name, but Mary Lou just stared. The words wouldn't come, not because she didn't understand, but because she had been taught that speaking to strangers brought the devil's gaze. The worker noted her unusual facial features, her delayed response, and her severe isolation. But the report vanished into bureaucracy, buried under more urgent matters. No one followed up. No one ever came back. Mary Lou's teenage years were a blur of repetition, tending the garden, caring for her sick mother, obeying her father's commands without question. But when her father died, everything changed. For the first time, Mary Lou stepped beyond the fence. She followed the dirt road down toward the valley, and for the first time, she saw the world that had forgotten her family. But the world didn't welcome her. It stared, just as the mountain children once did. And Mary Lou realized something horrifying. The curse didn't stay in the hills. It followed her, written into every part of her face. When Mary Lou came down from the mountain, it was like watching a ghost wander into daylight. The people in town didn't know what to make of her. She was quiet, polite, but there was something off, something that made even kind hearts turn cold. The cashier at the general store whispered to her coworker, "She's one of them hill folk." Children pointed. Men avoided her eyes. She found shelter in an abandoned church on the edge of town. The pews were rotting, the windows shattered, but to her, it was freedom. She would sit beneath the broken cross, humming old hymns her mother used to sing. For the first time, she could breathe without fear. But peace doesn't come easily to those born in blood like hers. The sheriff found her one evening and took her to the county home, a crumbling welfare building that smelled of bleach and despair. There she was examined by doctors, social workers, and curious strangers who treated her like a specimen. They asked where she came from, who her parents were, what she remembered. Mary Lou said very little. What could she say? That her father was also her uncle, that her grandparents were also cousins. Every word of truth sounded like blasphemy. One doctor from the University of Kentucky wrote in his report, "Subject exhibits profound cognitive dissonance, low verbal ability, and distinct craniofacial deformities consistent with extreme consanguinity." But beneath the sterile language, what he meant was simple. This was a woman born from generations of inbreeding. The papers called her the girl from the hills, and for a brief, cruel moment, Mary Lou became a local legend. People would drive past the county home, hoping to catch a glimpse of her through the window. Some said she looked like a creature. Others said she looked like a lost child. Both were true. Eventually, she was moved to a state facility where her days blurred into routine, meals, silence, sleep. But the nurses there spoke of strange things, of how she would draw crude family trees on the walls, names looping back into themselves, of how she would stare at her reflection for hours, mouthing words no one could understand. Years later, one nurse said something that still haunts those who read her account. "When she looked at me, I felt like she saw through me, like she recognized me, as if the curse hadn't stopped with her." If you're still watching, you're already braver than most. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done if this was your bloodline? Would you try to escape it or pretend it never existed? Time passed differently for Mary Lou. The world around her moved on. New presidents, new wars, new machines. But inside those gray hospital walls, she remained frozen, untouched by time. The nurses aged and left. The doctors rotated through, but Mary Lou stayed. Some said she didn't even understand what year it was. Others said she understood too much. In the 1970s, a young anthropologist named Dr. Ellen Fraser came across Mary Lou's case while researching rural genetics in Appalachia. The official files had been misplaced, buried under decades of neglect, but Ellen was curious. She wanted to meet this woman who had become more myth than memory. When she finally stood in front of Mary Lou, she expected confusion or hostility. Instead, Mary Lou smiled, slow and deliberate, like she had been waiting for her. Their conversations, or what little could be called conversation, were unsettling. Ellen would ask questions about her childhood, her family, the mountain. Mary Lou often replied with short, broken phrases: home in trees, family same, all same. Once Ellen asked if she missed them. Mary Lou simply said, "They don't die, they just go quiet." That night, Ellen dreamed of the mountain. She dreamed of cabins half sunk into the mud, of faces peering from the shadows, all of them looking the same. When she returned to the facility the next day, Mary Lou was gone, transferred, she was told, to a private care center upstate. But when Ellen tried to find the paperwork, it didn't exist. No transfer forms, no medical signatures. It was as if Mary Lou had never been there at all. Months later, a janitor cleaning out the old wing found a set of drawings tucked beneath a floorboard. They were rough sketches, dozens of faces, all identical, all staring outward. On the back of one page, scrawled in faint pencil, were 3 words: "They still sing." Ellen tried to track down the Whitmore property, but nature had swallowed it whole. Trees grew through the foundations, graves sank beneath moss, and the path leading up the hill had collapsed years ago. The locals refused to talk. "Best let the dead sleep," one old man warned. That family didn't just die. They stayed here, and somewhere, in the stillness of that forgotten mountain, a soft humming could still be heard. The same tune Mary Lou used to sing in the church, drifting through the pines like a memory refusing to fade. Years after Mary Lou's disappearance, the stories began to spread again. Hunters whispered about strange figures seen near the old Whitmore land, pale faces in the tree line, watching but never moving. Teenagers who dared to explore the hills at night swore they heard voices calling their names, sometimes in perfect unison. The sheriff would shake his head and say it was just the wind, but those who had grown up in the valley knew better. A historian named Paul Denning stumbled across Dr. Fraser's notes in a university archive. Something about the missing woman, the vanishing records, the erased ancestry. It all pulled him in. He visited the town, hoping to find answers. The locals warned him not to go up there after dark, but Paul didn't believe in curses. He wanted proof. When he reached the old Whitmore site, there was little left. A chimney half swallowed by vines, rusted tools, a well long since filled in. But near the tree line, he found something strange, a small wooden cross, freshly carved with the initials MLW, burned into it. The wood was clean. Too clean. Someone had been there recently. Paul returned to town and asked around. One elderly woman, nearly blind, told him in a trembling voice. She came down once before long ago, but she went back up. They always go back up. That night, Paul stayed at the old motel by the highway. He couldn't sleep. Around midnight, he heard something. Faint singing, drifting through the open window. A woman's voice, soft and cracked, carrying a melody that didn't belong to any hymn he knew. When he looked outside, the hills were black against the moonlight, and for a moment he thought he saw movement among the trees. The next morning, Paul's car was found at the trailhead. The door was open. His camera and notes were gone. Only his recorder remained, lying in the dirt. The last thing it captured was a single phrase, whispered in a shaking voice. "They still remember her." Since then, no one has dared to explore that part of the mountain. The old road is overgrown, the path erased, but on certain nights, when the wind moves just right, the valley fills with a sound, not quite human, not quite animal. Some say it's the echo of Mary Lou's song. Others say it's the family calling her home. Whatever it is, it reminds everyone who hears it that some bloodlines never end. They just wait. There's a reason stories like Mary Lou's are never told in classrooms. They don't fit into the clean version of American history, the one filled with triumph and progress. Hers is the other America, the forgotten one, the one that hides in the cracks of the map, where time and shame hold hands and whisper lullabies to the damned. After Paul Denning vanished, the state quietly sealed the mountain road. They called it a safety precaution, claiming the land was unstable after years of erosion. But locals knew the truth. They said it was to keep something in, not to keep people out. The Whitmore property became a ghost zone, a name you didn't speak aloud unless you wanted bad luck. Dr. Ellen Fraser lived the rest of her life haunted by what she'd seen. She refused to talk about Mary Lou again, except once, in an interview before her death. The journalist asked her if she believed the Whitmore family still existed. She paused, her voice barely above a whisper. Exist? Yes, but not as you think. No one really knows what she meant. Some believe Mary Lou's descendants live quietly among us, their blood thinned by time but not gone. Others think she meant something darker, that the family had crossed some invisible line, becoming something other, something that no longer belonged entirely to this world. In 2003, a forest fire swept through part of the old Whitmore land. When the embers cooled, search teams found traces of foundation stones and what appeared to be human remains, bones small enough to belong to a child. The forensic report listed them as undetermined. No DNA match was ever confirmed. Today, the area is private land owned by a paper company that keeps it fenced and patrolled. But satellite images still show faint outlines of the old paths curling through the forest like veins. And if you zoom close enough, you can still see the shape of the old church, its roof long gone, but the cross still standing. They say that on quiet nights, when fog rolls through the valley, a figure can be seen standing at the church door, barefoot, still, watching the road below. Some believe it's Mary Lou waiting for the family that left her behind. Others believe it's something much older, the curse itself, wearing her face. Maybe she never truly left the mountain. Maybe the mountain never let her go.